So Rebecca asked me, as she's mentioned, to talk about the startup journey. I should start by saying, look, there's lots of different types of startups, and I don't know if I know about startups in general, but I know a particular type of startup very well. And this is the third company I've started, and each of them, this is not necessarily by design, in retrospect, it seems like each of these companies have been taking some technology that's not, some really hard technology that's not quite ready for prime time, in a market that's not ready for it, and create a new product category based on that. So, like I said, that was not by design, but it seems like it must be a personality flaw in me that gets me into those kind of situations. It's hard, let me mention that. So, to be more specific, I was at MIT many years ago, Lab for Computer Science, now CSAIL, doing research on speech recognition. Started in 1994 a company called SpeechWorks to commercialize speech recognition technology for call center-based applications. That company was very successful. We had an IPO in year 2000. The company's still around, or the portion of it is still around, as a company called Nuance in Burlington here, a couple $1 billion a year company. And nowadays it seems like, this is the obvious thing, it's very fashionable to do AI these days. Back then it was not. I mean, it was very, very hard to get funding for a company doing any kind of machine learning AI thing. It was kind of a discredited field at the time. But we knew that would be happening, and we knew the time was right to do that. So that was that company. And then in 2005, I left there because I wanted to do something more consumer-centric. And the thing that was starting to happen, which button did I push? Green button. These were mobile devices back in 2005. We saw that things were starting to be not just phones, but they're getting connected to the internet, and we could start to do really interesting things on it from a speech recognition standpoint. So I started a company in 2006 called Vlingo. We were one of the first doing a voice-enabled assistant on mobile phones. We actually worked with Siri before they got bought by Apple, did their own thing. We were then the voice interface for Samsung, Nokia, RIM, and others. Again, company was quite successful. We got bought again by this same company, Nuance. So, but looking back on it, I was at CES a year and a half ago, and walking around, and every single building was plastered with speech recognition. People talking about, hey Google, or hey Alexa, these kind of things. This was all based on this kind of work. Actually, back in the 1980s at MIT, we were doing this kind of stuff way too early. Started a couple companies. Vlingo was the first one doing this kind of thing. And again, if you look at it now, it might seem kind of self-evident that that's, of course, you should talk to these things. But back in 1994, and even back in 2005, when we started Vlingo, we got so much pushback from the phone makers, from the carriers. I mean, back then we were saying we wanted to put, how do I go back? I go back to, can you just go back one slide? Back then we would try to put software on a phone, and the phone makers would say, no, we won't touch a phone unless the carrier lets us do that. And the carriers would say, no, these phones are our cash register. There's no way you could put software on these things. There's no way it's going to happen. And we don't think people want to talk to their phones anyway. I literally had an executive at a phone maker, or a carrier tell us so. But as you see, things progress, and these things eventually became true. So with all that backdrop, what we're doing today is at Sense, where we started in 2013, a company in Central Square, about 50 of us there now, based on this notion that, look, consumers are changing the way they interact with energy in their homes. They're getting solar panels for the roofs, they're getting electric cars, they're getting storage, and they're getting a bunch of smart home devices. And our view was that we can insert technology, machine learning, consumer-facing applications in there to make those things work better for consumers, and I'll tell you more about that in a few minutes. And the other thing that's happening, and this has actually happened since we started the company, we knew the writing on the wall of what's going to be happening with need for reducing carbon emissions from supply. 5 years ago, the utilities were very much resisting this. They're all now very much embracing it, at least the good ones are. These are public statements from a number of the utilities that we're starting to work with, where they are making serious efforts now to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, which involves increased renewables, it involves electrification of transportation, and all that then leads to much more intelligence of the energy systems behind the scenes. So I think the utilities are finally realizing that they got to get smarter about this stuff. But meanwhile, the energy infrastructure is not kept up. I mean, this is, if you get a solar panels for your roof or an electric car, an electrician comes and says, oh, I got to put in a little sub meter over here, I got to put a sub panel here. It really is retrofit stuff that has to go in these panels. That little orange box, by the way, is us. So what's the answer? You know, we've been going at this from, look, we can solve this with data, with intelligence, with digitization. And fortunately, you saw the talk this morning by Stephen Lieb. We're very much making use of this technology called Non-Intrusive Load Monitoring. Although we're a consumer-facing company, we do not call it NILM, because I don't think most consumers would respond well to, I would like a NILM for my house. So this is a consumer-facing product, goes in your electrical panel, measures the power in a very, very detailed way, and gives you detailed insights into what's going on in your home. People are using it for saving energy. They're using it for starting to shift when energy gets used, which is becoming increasingly important for these utilities. There's values around fault detection. We can tell when equipment's failing, just like Stephen showed this morning. Imagine that for your AC system to know your AC is going to break down or not break down in the middle of the summer. And then we're finding to drive consumer engagement, it's got to be way beyond just those things, because energy is kind of boring for most consumers. What we're finding is consumers start to really appreciate having real-time awareness of what's going on in their home. So we put a lot of work into the consumer-facing experience of this sort of thing. And again, this is kind of analogous to what we saw back in these early voice days, that the industry itself was saying, yeah, I'm not sure people want that. There's certainly a conventional wisdom in the consumer world that people don't care about energy. It's wrong. They actually do. They just have no clue about how to deal with saving energy in their homes. They want to. So we're trying to give them visibility, awareness, and help in a very consumer-friendly way. We're finding it to be very successful. People open our app on average every 2.1 days that have this. So I think we've proven the naysayers wrong about that people don't care about this stuff. They very much do. So that then leads to, this is fine. This is a consumer product. It goes inside your electrical panel. It costs $300. You got to get installed, which we know is a big barrier. This is the other complaint we had from the VCs when we started the company, is who's going to go and bother to do this? It's too hard to install. We knew all that, but we know it's going to change over time, and I'll show you why in just a minute. But once we're in the panel, then think of us at this intersection between energy on one side, this important resource coming into people's homes, and the rest of the IoT smart home world on the other side. So we've been increasingly integrating with all these other smart home devices. We're not just trying to be an intelligent energy monitor. We're trying to be at this kind of central point of intelligence of the home, making use of all the virtual sensor data we can from this non-intrusive load monitoring, but then increasingly connecting into the rest of the smart home world. So we're finding this to be a very unique position to be in, because most of the energy world, utilities, various energy players don't know how to play into the IoT world. In the consumer home side, it's a very messy business. And then most of the consumer smart home devices are ignoring the energy world for now. So there's kind of a nice white space for us to be in the midst of that. So I mentioned, though, that how do you get this to market at scale with this retrofit $300, get it into your panel after the fact? We know that doesn't scale. We're selling tens of thousands of these, and we can probably sell hundreds of thousands of them. But our goal is this should be in all houses. I mean, our mantra is homes should be smart in the way we can make them smart with all the benefits I just mentioned. It's got to happen. We're trying to make it happen. It's got to be built in. And this is where we got introduced. We've been talking for a while with the Schneider folks. They make a big chunk of the world's electrical infrastructure. We are now working very closely with Schneider on how this is built into the infrastructure. They now have a Schneider version of this product. Square D is their brand in the US for selling panels. They now have a version of our hardware, but we are the same application, the same software, the same interfaces into the rest of the world. So that's super exciting for us. They invested in Sense, and we have a very tight and deep partnership with them. Where's BMO? Happy to answer these questions together, because, like I say, we've been working really closely with those guys and super excited about it. So that's what I had for slides. I wanted to go fast and then leave time for questions and discussions. Yes?
Really nice talk. I enjoyed it. I like the story you tell about, how utilities are interested in, they always all these goals, and you can help solve those problems. And that's kind
it is somewhat more strategic than that. I mean, look, I think as a startup and potentially as corporates investing in startups in these kinds of worlds, you got to try to predict not what's important now, but what's going to be important 5 years from now, because that's when it starts to really matter. So when we started Sense, there was no kind of path to get this to market. The utilities didn't care. The conventional wisdom is energy doesn't matter to consumers. So we were fighting really, really tough headwinds. In fact, it was, even though I'd made a lot of money for VCs in the Boston area, it's really hard to get funding for getting this off of the ground. So yeah, you have to project what's going to be important 5 years from now and hope that not hope, but help make things fall in place to make that happen. Our original notion was starting fairly broadly, which is, homes are pretty dumb right now. About half the energy that people are buying is wasted, and you have no visibility, right? It's no surprise that if you don't pay attention to something, it's going to be, like if water were leaking in your basement, you'd know it and you'd fix it, right? Electricity, you have no idea that it's leaking. I mean, it doesn't leak, usually doesn't leak in the same way, although sometimes it does. Some of our consumers have found like nicked underground wires that are just heating up the ground and wasting energy. It's usually not leaking on the floor of the basement, but it is the equivalent, right? You have some dehumidifier that's old, that's just running all the time. You have no idea that that's using a third of your power. So that was our general notion, that people have no clue, no visibility, and we can use the stuff we know to help them do that, was the broad notion. Yes?
Can you talk about some of the major decision points when you were going through your journey? For example, why Schneider or like that installation plus that was major decisions?
Yeah, so the question was about kind of major decisions points along the way. At least one, and sometimes these were in conflict with what our venture guys were asking us to do. So one is we decided to start with a consumer-facing product first, right? We didn't go to utilities, we didn't go to panel makers, we didn't do any of that stuff. We wanted to focus on consumers first, for the sole reason we want to put all our effort into solving the consumer value proposition, getting this something that consumers want and like, even though it costs $300 and they got to cram it into their panel. So that's why we started there. But we also have been forever kind of aware that we can't scale a business through a $300 electrician install device. So this is why we started working with utilities, started to work with companies like Schneider to figure out the path. And we were actually talking to Schneider and all their competitors, and then found really good connections with the folks at Schneider, and then went quite deep with the Schneider folks and still are. So. But it is, the startup world is this kind of complicated. You know where you are, you know where you want to get, and the path in between is kind of messy. So don't let any of this sound like this is all a well-defined process to get from here to there. But you got to know where you're going so that you're not going off in the wrong diversions. I wish people like utilities would be faster, but that's not something I would do different. I think we actually. First of all, these things have taken way longer than we thought and wanted. When we actually started the company, we thought the base technology for doing this load disaggregation, non-intrusive load monitoring, we read all the research reports of people like Steven and so on. We thought it was kind of a solved problem by now. We collected some signals and went, oh, wait a minute. This is like speech recognition 30 years ago, which has kind of worked in the lab but not in the real world. This problem is as hard as speech recognition, if not harder. So one, it was not necessarily a mistake, but I mean, it was a mistake, but there's nothing we could have done differently, which is we had to work really, really hard just on technology for a couple of years before we could do anything.
So given that this is a technology that plugs directly into the house, I think you need to qualify the answer to this. That would be, what are your comments on just like the security of various devices like this, where you're collecting data in almost real time?
Yeah, so this is a super personal information about what's going on in a home. So security and data privacy is a super important topic, and I imagine we'll be talking about it in the next session. So we are taking that very seriously. Our agreement with our consumers, by the way, is you own your own data. It's your data. You give us rights to use it in various ways, but we don't have the rights to sell it, for example. And when we talk to utilities, utilities say things like, "Oh, well, we'll own the data." I'm like, no, you're not going to own the data. Like, this is not energy. We can see when people get up and brush their teeth in the morning. I don't think it's the case that the utilities are going to be allowed to know that. So we're trying to be an intermediary between the utilities and what the consumers care about in order to have kind of all the things we want to do, but in a good, safe way for the consumers. Let me give you another example, because something that's becoming increasingly important from an energy optimization standpoint is not only how much energy you use, but when you use it. So things like, there's various things in your home, you don't care when you use the energy, right? You don't care when your car gets charged as long as it goes far enough tomorrow. You don't care when your hot water gets heated as long as it's hot enough for you to take a shower and so on. And utilities need the ability to influence when that happens because of the renewables and details of the grid. Now, one extreme that they think is that they can give consumers complicated pricing structures. If you go look at the TOU, time of use rates in California, it's just a disaster for consumers right now. So I don't think it's the case that consumers want to worry about all those details. And then it's not the other extreme either, which is most consumers don't want their utility to decide when their car gets charged, right? So the answer is, in our view, automation that sits in between those two. So automation that runs on behalf of the consumers, and whether it's from us or from your car maker or somebody else, automation that runs on your behalf, you interact with it to what you care about. That automation should interact with pricing signals from the utilities to then make good decisions about when to charge your car, when to heat your water, when to cool your house, and so on. So that we're trying to get ourselves very much positioned in the middle of that, but do it in a safe, data private way.